Breaking news. The dead man alibi enters Congress. Good evening, America. I'm Daniel Anthony Weymouth, reporting from the part of Washington where people say I don't recall with the emotional range of a parking meter. Tonight's top story, former Jeffrey Epstein assistant Lesley Groff has appeared before Congress and delivered what experts are calling a very polished explanation, and what ordinary people at home are calling, wait, what? Groff's basic position is that she worked for Epstein for nearly 2 decades, scheduled appointments, handled logistics, helped manage the moving parts of his daily life, and yet somehow remained outside the criminal reality of what was happening around her. Now, to be fair, and in cartoon news we are always fair, except when ratings are down, Groff has not been criminally charged, and prior civil claims against her do not equal proof of guilt. A dismissal is not a conviction. It is also not a halo. But here is where the story gets interesting. Groff reportedly says that after Epstein's 2008 conviction, Epstein privately told her he had been blackmailed and set up. That claim becomes the low-bearing beam in the house of, I stayed because I believed him. And that, folks, is what we in the news business call a dead man alibi. Because Epstein is dead. He cannot confirm it, he cannot deny it, he cannot say, actually, I told that to everybody. He cannot say, no, I only told that to the assistant who kept the calendar moving. Conveniently, the only person available to explain the conversation is the person whose credibility depends on the conversation being true.
Now compare that private story to Epstein's public posture after the Florida case. Publicly, he did not seem to launch a full-throated I was framed campaign. He minimized. He managed the label. He tried to make the conviction sound less morally radioactive. That is not the same as publicly crying out, I was blackmailed and set up. So the question is not, could Epstein lie? Of course Epstein could lie. That man appears to have treated truth like a hotel towel, useful, disposable, and probably not his. The real question is, why would his strongest innocence story live privately inside the ear of a subordinate whose continued cooperation was operationally useful, instead of being shouted publicly by a man with lawyers, money, media access, and every reason on earth to repair his reputation? That is the pressure point. Once that private blackmailed and set up story starts to wobble, it does not automatically prove every other statement false. This is not the old false in one thing, false in everything sledgehammer. It is more precise than that. This is credibility contamination, because that one statement is not a side detail. It is the keystone. It explains why Groff says she remained. It explains why she says she trusted him. It explains why she says she continued operating in the same environment after a public conviction and sex offender status. Remove that keystone, and the whole innocence architecture begins making noises no building inspector wants to hear.
Then comes the second problem, the documents. This is no longer just about demeanor. A witness can appear calm. A witness can appear sympathetic. A witness can look like someone's aunt who brings potato salad to Thanksgiving and says, I just work the phones. But Congress is not limited to vibes. Congress has records, scheduling records, travel records, communications, victim accounts, staff overlap, names, dates, patterns. That is a different ballgame. Civil litigation may ask whether a plaintiff's lawyer can plead and prove a viable claim under a specific legal standard. Congressional scrutiny asks whether the story survives when placed next to the full operational record. And that brings us to Sarah Kellen. Kellen's role overlapped with Groff inside Epstein's world. Groff reportedly referenced Kellen when explaining what she says she was never told. That makes Kellen a natural witness bridge, not for a fishing expedition, for targeted questions. What did staff know? What was said after 2008? Was there a shared understanding about the massages? Did Epstein tell others he had been blackmailed and set up? Did Groff's claimed ignorance match the observable reality inside the operation? Those are not wild questions. Those are the questions created by Groff's own explanation.
So tonight's conclusion is simple. A civil dismissal is not factual exoneration. A calm demeanor is not documentary proof. A dead man's private statement is not a credibility fortress. And when the person relying on that statement spent years helping operate the machinery around Epstein, Congress is entitled to ask whether the innocence narrative is a story or a structure that collapses under its own paperwork. For now, the official forecast in Washington calls for continued hearings, scattered denials, heavy document review, and a 90% chance of someone saying, "I was not aware," directly into a microphone. Back to you in the studio, where the lights are bright, the suits are loud, and the truth is apparently somewhere between a calendar invite and a subpoena.
And then, ladies and gentlemen, we arrive at the locked steel door with designer initials on it, Ghislaine Maxwell. Maxwell is not some random name in the Epstein files. She is the convicted co-conspirator, the woman already serving the sentence, the person whose silence does not sound like confusion, it sounds like inventory control. When Maxwell appeared before the House Oversight Committee, she reportedly did what people do when the room has too many documents and not enough exits. She invoked the Fifth Amendment. Now, invoking the Fifth is a constitutional right. This is America. You are allowed not to help the government build a staircase to your own legal basement. But politically and investigatively, Maxwell's silence creates a very loud question. Who is she protecting? Herself? Others? The old operation? The people still alive? The people still powerful? The people whose names live somewhere between a calendar entry, a flight log, and a lawyer's nervous cough? And here is where Congress has a tool that changes the temperature in the room. Immunity. If Congress grants court-approved immunity, then the Fifth Amendment wall starts losing bricks. The witness can no longer refuse merely because the answer might incriminate her in the immunized zone. Refusal then becomes a contempt problem.
And for Maxwell, contempt is not just a headline. She is already in federal custody. That means pressure does not have to look like a new criminal trial. It can look like prison classification, housing, privileges, transfer risk, loss of soft placement, the quiet administrative machinery that turns "I refuse to answer" into "enjoy your new institutional weather pattern." Now, nobody should pretend immunity is simple. Granting protection to a convicted Epstein co-conspirator is politically radioactive. It would look ugly, it would sound ugly, it would require a very specific reason. But that is exactly why the questioning has to be surgical. Not "tell us everything you know about everyone." Too broad, too theatrical, too easy to dodge. The stronger move is, what did Groff know? What did staff understand? What was said after 2008? Was there an internal explanation that Epstein had been blackmailed or set up? Who repeated it? Who believed it? Who needed to believe it so the operation could keep moving?
That is where Maxwell becomes useful, not as a redemption witness, not as a truth fairy in prison khakis, as a pressure instrument against the architecture. Because if Groff's story is "Epstein fooled me" and Kellen can describe the staff environment, then Maxwell is the person who can potentially say whether that ignorant story was real compartmentalization or just the polished language people use after the building catches fire. So now the investigation has 3 doors. Door 1, Groff, the executive assistant with the dead man alibi. Door 2, Kellen, the overlapping staff witness who can test what was visible inside the operation. Door 3, Maxwell, the convicted insider whose silence may itself be the loudest object in the room. And that is tonight's Congressional Weather Report.